Which books cast a spell on me this October and which fell short? From dark magic to romantic twists, I'm gonna reveal my favorite reads and the ones I didn't finish. This October, I tackled a really wide range of reading. I went all the way from twisted mysteries to sci-fi epics, and I found some true gems and some misses. So let's dive into the October reads that gave me a bit of magic, suspense, and adventure. So October was another month where I just didn't have a lot of time to sit down and read. And because of that, I did end up switching to reading a chapter in bed before I tried to fall asleep, just so I could make progress on my physical TBR. That being said, I still haven't finished Neon Ghosts or Mistletoe Malarkey, which means that I haven't even started Convergence or The Secrets That You Keep, like I told you I was going to read last TBR. And the reason I haven't even started this is because I typically only read one physical book, one Kindle book, and one audiobook at a time. So I just couldn't really justify starting this yet when I'm in the middle of Neon Ghosts. I'm really liking Neon Ghosts, and that's all I'm gonna say until I finish it. But I am about halfway through, which means that most of the books that I've finished this month were all audiobooks, and I read 14 books in October. And just like the last few months, I'll start with my least favorite and end with my favorite, and honestly, the results of this wrap-up may surprise you. As a note, I have officially switched from Goodreads to Storygraph, so I have decided to adjust my rating scale because Storygraph has a way for you to track DNF'd books. So my DNF books will now no longer receive a rating, and I will only talk about them to talk about why I didn't finish it. My one-star books are books that I didn't like and probably will never read anything by that author again for whatever reason. My 2-star books are books I didn't like, but I'd be willing to give that author a chance. The 3-star books are good books, they're fine. 4-star books are books that I really enjoyed, but I will probably never reread. And my 5-star books are books I could definitely see rereading and that I want to have a physical copy of at some point. So for the Magical Readathon, I was working on summoning and impling, which means that I had to find books that connected at least 2 of the prompts on the summoning circle. The first book, which was a 2-star book for me, fit the prompts to start the book at night and to read a book by an author that I'd read before. And that book was Soulfire by Juliet Cross. Soulfire is the first book in the Nightwing series by Juliet Cross, which is it's not exactly a dragon shifter series, or at least not in this first book. It is a Batwing Boy series, if you know, you know. So Jesson is a human who loves the night scene, and she runs into a dragon human hybrid named Lucius. And naturally, there's a conflict in one of the clubs and a fight breaks out, and Jesson gets thrust into Lucius's arms, where Lucius realizes that she's his mate. But it is a bit more complicated than that because their fathers are political rivals. So you've got a bit of a Romeo and Juliet story going on here and fated mates. And honestly, I am not a huge fan of fated mates in general. I feel like it takes away a lot of agency from the characters and a lot of responsibility about falling in love. I'm also never really a huge fan of like party girl protagonists, and Jesson is definitely that, at least at the start of this book. She goes to clubs like almost every night. Now, it is fully a way for her to rebel against her father. So in that way, it's a little different, but it's never just like my favorite female character to read. And overall, it just didn't really feel original. And I read other stuff by Juliet Cross that I really loved, so it was a little bit of a letdown for me. And I don't think I'll be continuing this series. Starting off my 3-star reads is actually the next chain in my Impling Summoning Circle, which the prompts for that were to read from an author that I've read before and to read a book that was between 400 and 450 pages. So I chose Talon by Julie Kagawa. Ember is a young dragon who is learning how to assimilate into human society. and she is a member of Talon, which is basically the government entity for all the dragons. And they are trained to blend in with humans because they have been hunted to near extinction by the Order of St. George. So Ember and her brother Dante are in this California town trying to live a normal teen experience. Then enters Garrett, kind of your perfect soldier from the Order of St. George, who has been tasked with hunting down a suspected dragon in the town where Ember lives. Naturally, they meet and fall in love, but it gets more complicated than that because there is also a rebel dragon entity that does not believe in falling in line with the edicts of Talon. So there's a lot of political machinations going on in the background. I will say this book had really interesting world building. It kind of plays on what you already know, and as someone who actually wrote a paper in art history on the illuminated manuscripts of St. George, my little art history geek was nerding out there for a minute. I really liked Garrett as a character. I thought he was interesting and he had a really good character growth journey. Ember was fine. She was a very typical YA female protagonist. I didn't dislike her, I didn't love her. I'm curious to see how she develops as the series continues. I will also say there is a love triangle in this series that I don't absolutely hate. So there's that. And of course, if you watched my book versus adaptation in October, you would know that I read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. And this tells the story of Pippa, who is trying to write her capstone or EPQ project, basically a senior thesis in high school or college, depending on which country and which version you're reading, which that's a thing. But she is doing her project on trying to prove that the boy who was accused of this girl's murder 5 years ago is innocent. And she teams up with the boy's brother to do this. This book overall was only fine for me. I thought it was pretty unrealistic and not in a good way, just as far as if in real life you tried to do the things that Pippa does, at least in the US, she would have been murdered. And without giving things away, it definitely gets more dangerous as the book progresses. But she does some stuff that I'm like, girl, if you were in the US, you would have been shot. Which is one of the reasons why I'm kind of upset that when they were releasing the book in the US, they changed the setting of the book from the UK to the US. Because maybe I wouldn't have thought it was quite as unrealistic if I knew it was set in the UK. So before I started trying to summon my Impling, I was actually still adventuring on the 2023 adventure map for the Magical Readathon. And for the prompt to brew a potion of sleepless night, which meant that I was supposed to read a book when it's dark, I read the first 4-star book on this list. And that is The Year of Less by Kate Flanders. And this is a non-fiction book that is also kind of a memoir written by Kate Flanders that talks about her year of no spending. I did think it was really interesting and I enjoyed the overall message. That being said, the lengths that she went through were a little extreme. I don't think I could ever do that. But it does tie very closely into this idea that I have been trying to become a more mindful consumer. And it did prompt me to finally do some decluttering and get my office done. So I'm not really going to complain about it too much. Okay, so the first book that I have to read before my roommate's next book club is The Ministry of Time by Callie-Ann Bradley. And this tells the story of the Bridge, who is a ministry worker, and she gets recruited into the Ministry of Time to be essentially a handler for an expat, which is someone who would have died in the original timeline if they were not rescued by the Ministry of Time. And she gets assigned to Commander Graham Gore, who initially died in the expedition to the Arctic in, I want to say, the 1840s. Through the course of this book, you get to see how Graham adapts to modern life along with his fellow expats. In the meantime, he also falls in love with our main character. And of course, you start to realize that the Ministry of Time isn't exactly what it seems. So I will say, I read this book very fast. It was very easy to digest. And I really liked all of the characters, especially some of the female time expats. They were phenomenal. However, I couldn't give this 5 stars because I feel like the book didn't exactly know what it was trying to be. And some people may say that that makes it really original, but for me, it didn't really do any of the aspects the full justice that it deserved. That being said, very excited to read more by Callie-Ann Bradley. Wrapping up the spring 2023 Magical Readathon, I did finish my restoration prompt that I mentioned in my TBR video by reading Wicked Court by May Sage. And this tells the story of Vlari, who is an impoverished Fae princess with a power that honestly could directly threaten the queen. And the queen doesn't like that, so she controls Vlari's life very closely, including setting her up for an arranged marriage, or trying to. When she gets called to a ball where she knows that she's going to be introduced to a lot of suitable matches, she makes a deal with a school rival from her school days to attend the ball with her. Now, this book, I will say, was a little bit info dumpy in the beginning. However, I think it was written very well in Vlari's voice, so it wasn't quite as annoying as I usually find other info dumping. And overall, the heroine and the feel of the story and the dynamics between the heroine and our romantic interest, or at least I'm assuming he's going to be the romantic interest, felt very similar to The Cruel Prince, which I love. And it had a twist at the end that I can honestly say I didn't see coming and thought it was really unique. I'll definitely continue this duology. I read my next 4-star read for my online book club, and that book was Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which is kind of a time epic that talks about evolution and survival and a lot of things. And I can't really explain a lot of it without going into spoilers, but basically you've got this planet that's been terraformed to support human life for once Earth fails, except that it has been infected by a virus by kind of a crazy scientist, where the creatures that are native to that planet start to evolve at a rapid pace. Meanwhile, you have a ship of settlers who are in cryogenic sleep and woken up periodically in order to help preserve the human race. And they are on their way to this planet. Now, I will say when I was reading it, it took me a while to realize that the overarching plot of this book was just survival, but it does have a lot of what I would call like mini plot arcs. Like there are a lot of like plot arcs that start and finish and start and finish and start and finish. And this book literally covers, I think, millennia of time. I will say it's really beautifully written. It did take me a while to get invested in the human characters, but it did manage to successfully invest me into the lives of spiders. So I guess that's a win. So back to Impling Summoning, and I know that I'm jumping around a lot in the Magical Readathon in my wrap-ups, so I actually have a question for you. Do you prefer to get my wrap-ups from the order that I liked least to liked best, or would you prefer to get them in chronological order from what I read when? Let me know. And this next book actually fit 3 of the links on the Summoning Circle. It had to have a title with a letter that appeared at least twice. It had to be released either this year or last year, and it had to have at least a little blue on the cover. And that book was The Endless War by Daniel L. Jensen, which is the 4th book in the Bridge Kingdom series. However, I will say overall, the Bridge Kingdom seems to be kind of like duologies in an overarching universe. I would say that this is the 2nd book in the 2nd duology, and I think based on what I've seen in the list of books that there's at least another duology that either the 1st book has been released or the whole thing has been released. I'm not sure on that. But basically this follows the brother of the female protagonist from the 1st duology, and he is a king who has kind of like a star-crossed love because their countries have been at war. And this book really amps up the conflict of that war. So we're coming to a head. Either things are going to go really well or really badly. And that's one of the things I really liked about this book. I love a good political fantasy romance. I will say the political intrigue really amps up in this book. So if you're interested in that, you're probably going to enjoy this book. However, I am going to put a trigger warning here. This book may be triggering if you have suffered from narcissistic abuse, so be aware of that. As someone who has suffered from narcissistic abuse, I wasn't super triggered by it, but I definitely picked up on it. So if it's very triggering for you, just something to be aware of. I never would have thought that I would ever read a book that had likable cannibals. You're just gonna have to read it to see what I mean by that. And then to read the final link in my summoning circle for my impling, I had to read a book that was between 400 and 450 pages and had to have one letter appearing at least twice in the title. So I chose Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. And Gideon is the servant of the ninth house, which is basically like an order of necromancers. I mean, the whole society is built around necromancy, but like the ninth house is like a particularly cultish necromancy, if that makes sense. But basically, she and kind of the heir to the house get called to participate in these tests to become like a major advisor to the emperor of this universe. I will say I've never read Necromancers in Space before, and it was pretty interesting. I loved the snarky voice of Gideon in the book, and I really liked the way her relationship with Harrow develops throughout the course of the book. The plot was really interesting and creepy and unlike anything I've read before. So with finishing this book, this means that I have successfully summoned my impling. It shouldn't surprise you that I chose the garden impling for Osmanthus because, you know, plants. The next 4-star book that I read was the book for my workbook club, and it was actually my book choice this month, so I chose A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. And this tells the story of Kel, who is one of the last Antari, which is like a magical race that can travel among different, I would say, universes. And he is able to travel to all of the different types of London. So you've got Grey London, which I think is like a Victorian version of our London. Red London, which is where he comes from, which is like the magical fairy London. And then you've got White London, which is just creepy, and Black London, which supposedly doesn't exist anymore. When he picks up an artifact from Black London, he gets pulled into all sorts of trouble and he drags Layla, a thief from Grey London, along with him. So I really enjoyed this book. So far, V.E. Schwab is pretty much somebody that I really enjoy as a writer. I really liked our point of view characters, though I will say the narrator's voice for Layla was kind of insufferable. And I don't know, do you have a gender of audio narrator that you prefer? Because he had a very nice voice overall, but sometimes I struggle with male audiobook narrators because all of their female characters sound whiny. And this definitely was one of those instances for me. Whereas I know one of my oldest friends, she doesn't like female narrators because she doesn't like how they do male voices. The happy medium for me is I really enjoy duet narrations, and I think that we need to have more of those out there. Yeah, what do you think? The magical system and the world building in this book is on point. I absolutely loved it. So overall, I will say this is another V.E. Schwab hit for me. So now we're moving into my 5-star reads, and the first one really surprised me. It was the book that I read for the book club that I'm in with my sister, and that was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I mean, I'm not going to summarize this one because chances are you know about Frankenstein. It actually really surprised me that it was a 5-star read because I am not normally a fan of classics. As someone who has dyslexia, I find them really difficult to read. However, I found this one to be really accessible, and the themes of who the monster is really felt ahead of its time. So I just really loved reading this book. Let's go back to the Magical Readathon. After brewing a potion of Sleepless Night, I started the autumn 2023 semester, and I started it by taking my alchemy class. For the ordinary status, I had to turn stone to copper, which meant that I needed to read the first book in a series. So I read Call Me Maybe by Cara Bastone. And this tells the story of a woman who's calling in to IT support because she's been building a website for her business that she's about to launch and everything starts going screwy. And she and her customer service rep start having a really good rapport and start kind of building a relationship over the phone. And I honestly was surprised by how much I liked this book. Now, this does start as an Audible original, so it is more like a radio production than a full book, but there is a book version available, and I do kind of want a copy. I really loved how the characters formed a real emotional connection without ever having seen each other. I will say that I did see kind of the twist coming. Like, I figured out half of it, and then the other half I was like, oh, so it's not unpredictable. And I love how when, they actually meet, you can tell that she's really into it, even though he was talking bad about his appearance the whole time throughout the book. It just made my demisexual soul happy. So after reading Artificial Condition last month on the adventuring map, I had the choice to either visit the locked library or break into the main lab. Osmanthus is a rule follower, so naturally I chose to unlock the library, which meant that I had to read a book that I already own. So in my Audible library, I chose Seatmate by Cara Bastone. I read this book, the third book in the series, before the first book in the series, Call Me Maybe. I didn't realize it at the time, but I will say at least it's an anthology series, so I didn't feel like I was missing anything. Even though there was a fair amount of internal screaming that I was reading them out of order. So now for that trilogy, all I have to do is read the second book. But Seatmate tells the story of two people who are traveling from, I think it's Boston to New York City. They end up sitting next to each other. And again, kind of building a rapport and a connection, getting to know some of the other bus passengers. And our female heroine is trying to get to like the interview of a lifetime for her job, and things just keep going wrong. And her seatmate, he's trying to help her get there. I'm sorry, I've forgotten both their names. And throughout the course of the novel, the situation gets even more ridiculous, but also hysterical to try and get her to this interview on time. Judging the fact that I gave both of these Cara Bastone books 5 stars, it might be that Cara Bastone is kind of my go-to for clean romance moving forward. The banter between these two characters was just so cute. The hijinks in the plot do just keep getting increasingly more ridiculous, but I was here for it. I would also love to see an adaptation of this book. I think it would be hilarious. It's time for my favorite book of the month, which was Don't Hex and Drive by Juliet Cross. Yes, that's right. My least favorite book and my favorite book of the month were by the same author. So this is the second book in the Stay a Spell series. I read the first one a while ago. I want to say for Halloween in maybe 2021. And this book tells the story of Isadora, who is one of the sisters of the Savoy sisters. And she is an extreme introvert. She prefers to spend more time in her greenhouse than with people, and she volunteers at her local animal shelter and extends the lives of the dogs there until they can find their forever home. However, she does end up pulling into an investigation for some girls who have gone missing because she fits the type that the perpetrators are looking for. And she gets paired with a vampire named Devraj. And Devraj is not only a vampire who is a Stygian, which is like, from what I can tell, like a super powerful like tracker that's a vampire. Not only is he that, but he is also a famous Bollywood star. Now, he has just recently retired from being a Bollywood star because, of course, in the human world, if you were to continue to not age, people might get suspicious of that. And naturally, they get paired up together, and while Devraj really likes Isadora, Isadora is not convinced on Devraj as a person, and you get to watch their relationship develop. I will say, I felt a little called out by the female main character. Not so much in that, I prefer to be in my greenhouse because I do not have a green thumb, but I am an animal lover and an extreme introvert. Not that you can tell from these videos, but sometimes it's easier to talk to a camera than an actual person. And also, her views on romance very much align with my views on romance. Now, her views do eventually change because, of course, this is a romance series. But yeah, I felt very called out at the beginning of this book. I really loved, and I love this about the first one too, like the big, messy family vibes. And I really enjoyed the urban fantasy world building that Juliet has done in this universe. Also, I think Devraj is just kind of like precious as a character, and the spicy scenes were definitely spicy. So this was a duet narration. Both narrators were good. However, the male narrator, who has a fabulous voice to listen to, very deep, he started to try to do like a very subtle Indian accent at the beginning, but then just like stopped, like after the first chapter. He no longer did it. And Devraj is supposed to have a subtle Indian accent. And then I cracked up every single time it switched to Devraj's POV because, you know, at the beginning of the chapter, it tells you the POV. And every single time the male narrator was like, Devraj. And I just cracked up every single time. But didn't kill my enjoyment of the book, obviously, because it was my favorite book of the month. So as the nights grow longer, it's the perfect time to snuggle up with some books. In this video, my November TBR, I'm gonna give you some cozy reading suggestions. Let's see what stories tomorrow brings.